Brad Arnold was the voice of a generation, the face of a band that once felt unstoppable, and now he's gone. But this story isn't really about how it ended. It's about the cracks that have been forming for years in plain sight, even at their peak. Three Doors Down were everywhere. The crowds were massive. For a moment it felt untouchable, until those fractures began to show. Members left, addiction crept in, loss became unavoidable, and slowly, almost quietly, the band that once felt invincible began to feel like it was just trying to survive. And when Brad died, it didn't just mark the end. It forced us to look back and ask, what actually happened? How does a band go from defining an era to slowly losing the very thing that made them matter? In 1996, Brad Arnold was just a regular high school kid with a burning passion for music. He was growing up in a little middle-of-nowhere town in Mississippi, the kind of place that rarely leads to global stages. Lead guitarist Matt Roberts and bassist Todd Harrell were already friends, and Chris Henderson would join shortly after as rhythm guitarist. Believe it or not, Arnold actually started out on the drums, singing lead vocals from behind the kit. Looking at these old performances, it's clear they were just having the time of their lives, without a care in the world. They had no reason to think it wouldn't last. Almost immediately, they were filling up their local bar every weekend. With nothing else to do in town, their little band quickly became a local favorite. There were no theatrics or rock star posturing. They just looked and felt like a familiar local band that somehow sounded way better than they should have. But only the people in the room knew it. Their shows felt more like a hangout than a performance, and early fans fell in love with that feeling. So they already had chemistry. What they didn't yet have was a voice. It started with Kryptonite, which Brad actually wrote in the middle of a high school math class. The band loved it, and so did those early fans, so they started putting together a small demo tape of original songs, and by 1998, Three Doors Down were playing their originals up and down the Gulf Coast. Still a bar band, still local. But Kryptonite wouldn't stay local for long. A radio station got a hold of the song, and once it hit the airwaves, everything changed. Kryptonite didn't feel like a typical single. It felt like someone had cracked open a door that was never supposed to exist for these guys. What made it different wasn't fancy tricks or new techniques. It was recognition. People heard themselves in it, and suddenly, that small town hangout energy translated everywhere. Before they even had time to process, they had signed a record deal and released an album. Bars turned into arenas, cities blurred together, nights blended into a rhythm they hadn't asked for. And the momentum didn't stop. Each year, the tour stretched further, the rooms got bigger, and the songs kept coming. One hit turned into another, and suddenly a decade had passed. But now they were doing much more than just playing songs. They were carrying meaning for millions, whether they were ready for it or not. And at the time, it felt like nothing could slow them down. By 2011, amidst their Time of My Life tour, their tight schedule was beginning to catch up with them. Matt Roberts was the first to slip. Throughout the touring cycle, he had quietly begun pulling back, missing long stretches of the road, no longer fully present even when he was there. At the time, it didn't feel concerning. Just exhaustion, just a little extra needed space. But by the end of the tour, it became clear it was something more. Roberts quietly announced that he would be leaving Three Doors Down. And with him gone, a balance within the band was quietly shifting. More of the weight now fell on Brad. He had become the voice, the face, the connection point for millions of fans. And the machine around him didn't slow down. A new guitarist stepped in almost immediately, and with a greatest hits album on the way, the schedule only tightened further. From the outside, nothing looked broken. But off stage, the pressure was starting to follow Brad home. He had always been a casual drinker, but as the band grew, and the surrounding pressure grew with it, alcohol slowly shifted from something social to a necessity. What had once been a release was becoming routine. By around 2014, Brad realized that it wasn't just a habit anymore. It was a problem. And if it continued, it wasn't just his own health at risk. It was the stability of the band itself. So he made a decision that may have saved both. He checked himself into a rehab center and got clean. A small, quiet victory. And for a moment it felt like they had narrowly escaped something much worse. But the world he was returning to hadn't slowed down. What most people didn't realize was that another struggle had already been unfolding inside the band. In fact, bassist Todd Harrell was fighting a much quieter battle. What began as a prescription medication, something to take the edge off long tours and long nights, slowly became part of a routine. It stayed out of sight for years, folded neatly behind the scenes. As shows went on and records kept coming, everything seemed okay. But in 2013, whatever balance had been holding it all together finally gave way. Late one night while Todd was driving in Nashville, he crossed the median and collided head-on with another vehicle, killing a man in the process. Police found prescription drugs in his system and unprescribed medication on his person. He was charged with vehicular homicide by intoxication, DUI, and possession. The band was devastated. For the first time, the damage couldn't be handled quietly. Now there were real-life consequences. The 4 shows that had been planned early that year in the US were canceled out of respect. For the upcoming European tour, Justin Biltonen from the Campaign 1984 stepped in as the band's bassist. The machine kept moving, but now the gears were grinding. Sound checks took longer, on-stage interactions felt slightly off. Something that had once felt seamless was beginning to feel scripted. And Todd's struggles didn't end there. In early 2014, another arrest followed. Shortly after, the band announced that his departure would be permanent, and Biltonen became the new official replacement. Talented, but he hadn't stood in those Mississippi bars. He hadn't grown up with the band. By the time Us and the Night arrived in early 2016, the band was operating in a leaner form. Todd was gone. Matt had long since stepped away. What remained was capable of writing, recording, and climbing the charts, but the energy, the closeness, the sense of shared purpose was no longer there. Tours felt like ticking boxes. Studio sessions felt procedural. Then, more devastating news arrived. Matt Roberts had passed away at just 38 years old. With Matt gone and Todd in jail, Brad was suddenly the only one left from the beginning, now standing inside a band that barely resembled the one he had started. The only one left who remembered the late night jam sessions, the bar shows, the thrill of hearing Kryptonite on the radio for the first time. The weight of every loss, every change, now rested squarely on him. Quietly, invisibly, but entirely. Shows were still booked. Albums were still talked about. From the outside, Three Doors Down looked intact. But inside, it no longer felt like a band trying to build something. It felt like something trying not to stop. Us and the Night in 2016 was the final studio album from Three Doors Down. Following the supporting tour, they continued to play shows, but the pace slowed. The venues grew smaller, the festival slots shifted lower on the bill. Their presence in mainstream rock wasn't dominating anymore. In other words, the band existed, but it no longer felt like it was building towards something. They had once headlined arenas. Now, in some cities, they opened for newer bands who had grown up on their music. In 2018, they announced that new music was in the works, and for a moment it sounded like a new chapter might be coming. But to this day, no follow-up has arrived. Then in 2024, something unexpected happened. When they joined Creed for the Summer of '99 tour, the arenas were loud again. The lights were brighter. The crowd sang every word like it was 2002. For a few nights, it felt familiar, almost like nothing had changed. It raised a quiet question. Was this a revival, or just a reunion with a moment that had already passed? The band was scheduled to return for the 2025 leg of the tour. Before that could happen, Brad released devastating news.
Hey everybody, it's Brad from Three Doors Down. Got some not so good news for you today. So I'd been sick a couple of weeks ago and then went to the hospital and got the diagnosis that I had clear renal carcinoma that had metastasized into my lungs. It's stage 4, and that's not real good. But you know what? We serve a mighty God, and I'd love for you to lift me up in prayer every chance you get.
Just a year later, Brad Arnold passed away. And with that, the last remaining founding member of Three Doors Down was gone. What began as a backyard jam session had grown into a soundtrack for a generation. And now, the only person left who had been there from the very beginning was no longer here to carry it forward. It hasn't been made fully clear whether the band will continue. With Matt gone, Todd gone, and now Brad as well. It feels uncertain at best. But maybe that isn't the real question, because long after tours slowed and the charts moved on, the songs stayed, still playing in cars, still shouting back in arenas. The band may have changed, it may have faded, and it will never return to the form it once was. But what they created didn't disappear. It just stopped belonging to them and started belonging to us.